Hey everybody, and welcome to the channel. My name is Hack, and today we're exploring all three armor types in the Elder Scrolls Online, whether it's light, medium, or heavy, and explaining which type of armor is the best for your character and why. If you're new to ESO or even just picking up the game again after a break, then this guide is going to be important for making your build the best it can be, whether you want to focus on dealing damage, healing, tanking, or even solo play. That's because choosing the right armor is about much more than just the defensive numbers you see on the item. Instead, you actually need to consider all the passive bonuses that each armor type can provide and how they're going to make you better at whatever role you want to succeed at. So we'll of course cover all the basics. We'll detail every single armor passive in the light, medium, and heavy armor skill lines. We'll talk about active abilities, and then even go over some tips for combining armor types for an end game build. And that's all coming up next on HGM, so here we go. So let's cover the basics first. In the Elder Scrolls Online, there are three main armor weights or types. That's light armor, medium armor, and heavy armor. As I said before, these armor pieces have different armor values depending on the armor's type, as light, medium, or heavy. Now, of course, these armor pieces have different armor values depending on the armor type. For example, a heavy chest piece at CP 160, which is the max level for gear in the game, this has an armor value of 2,420. While the same chest piece in medium armor has a value of 1,820, and a chest in light armor has a value of 1,220. So as you can see just at the basic armor value, these are substantially different based on the armor weight, even for the same piece, like a chest piece, for example. In ESO, we also have 7 distinct armor pieces possible to equip, not including shields. That's going to be the head, the chest, shoulders, hands, waist, legs, and feet. Even if you use the same armor weight for all 7, some pieces have a different armor value. For example, we saw earlier the heavy chest piece that was 2,420. But the leg piece is actually 2117. Head, shoulders, and boots also provide the same armor value as legs. Again, that's 2117. Hands are substantially less. That's 1210 for heavy armor. And finally, the waist has the lowest armor value of any piece in the game. That's going to come in at 907 for heavy armor. Of course, this is all for heavy armor pieces, and the armor value will obviously go down for the corresponding pieces if you use medium armor, and it'll go down even a bit further for the same pieces in light armor. Finally, you can improve the armor rating of any armor piece regardless of weight by upgrading its quality. So at a crafting station with the right materials, you can go back and actually improve that armor value. Going back to our heavy chest from earlier, we have the default quality of white, which has that armor value of 2,420. Upgrading that with our materials to green quality also increases the armor value. That's going to bring it up to 2516. A blue upgrade increases the armor further to 2612. Purple increases that slightly more to 2676. And finally, upgrading this piece of armor to gold quality increases your armor value to 2772. Of course, this is just the armor's raw defensive value. There's so much more involved in picking the best armor. We have to talk more about passives and active abilities in the armor skill lines. But first, let's talk about how you level up your armor skills, and generally speaking, what type of armor is best for each playstyle in the game. All three armor types in ESO have their own corresponding skill line, which includes 5 passive skills and 1 active skill. Now, you may not see these skill lines at first, so the trick to unlocking the armor skill line is you actually need to equip 3 pieces of armor for that particular weight. You can see here I have a brand new character and no armor skills are visible. But once I equip 3 pieces of heavy armor, I instantly see that skill line appear. The same is going to be true for medium and light armor. Just equip 3 pieces of that weight and you are good to go. As far as leveling up your armor skill, each skill line can be leveled from 1 to 50. Now what's interesting is that the armor skill line actually levels up faster based on how many pieces of that armor type you are wearing. So if you only wear 3 pieces of heavy armor, Or if I even go back to maybe 1 or 2 pieces of heavy armor, my heavy armor skill line will level up slower than, let's say I had maybe 5 pieces of heavy, or even up to the maximum of 7 heavy pieces of armor. That's going to level up that heavy armor skill line much, much faster. Now let me just say that might not be the best idea. The problem with only wearing one type of armor is you're only leveling up one skill line, right? And we actually have 3. So instead, while you're leveling, you want to actually equip as many different pieces of armor as possible, maybe even all 3 types of armor at the same time, and that's so that you can actually start leveling up those armor skill lines all at once. Of course, you do want to focus on one armor skill line in particular. That's going to be your end game armor, the one that you wear the majority of pieces for. So you can focus on that, but generally speaking, you will want to have all 3 armor skill lines maxed out by the time you reach the end game in ESO. Now for a quick overview of each armor skill line and what it's good for. Again, this is going to be just very general, but it will give us a good starting point, and we'll dive into each armor type more in detail next. For casters and healers, basically any build that uses primarily magicka abilities, your best armor is most definitely light armor. If you're going to go the melee weapon route like dual-wield, two-handed, even if you're going to use a bow at range, or you're just generally using a lot of abilities that cost stamina, you instead want to focus on medium armor. Finally, if you're planning on being a tank build, or if you just want to increase your defenses and survivability to the max, either in PvE or PvP, then you'll want to consider focusing on heavy armor. Again, these are just general rules of thumb when it comes to which armor type is best for which type of character. To explain why this is true, we really have to look at the armor passives in detail and how they support different builds and playstyles. So taking a look at those light armor passives first, as we said, this armor type supports mainly caster builds or healers, basically any build whose skills are mostly magicka based. Why is that? Well, the reason is that the light armor passives all support those playstyles, and those passives are super powerful. For example, we have the evocation passive, which increases your magicka recovery by 4% per piece of light armor that you have equipped. And it also reduces the magicka cost of our abilities by 2% per piece as well. Then you have the spell warding passive, which increases spell resistance. You have the prodigy passive, which increases your spell critical chance by 2191. It's essentially 10% extra spell crit on any skill that costs magicka. We also have the concentration passive, which increases your spell penetration. This allows your magicka-based skills to do more damage. And finally, we have the grace passive, which reduces the effectiveness of snares on your character and reduces the cost of sprint for you. So as you can see, these are all very powerful passive skills when it comes to increasing our magicka-based damage, increasing our magicka recovery, and even lowering the cost of those magicka abilities with some extra utility thrown in. All great passives for magicka-focused builds, and this is why we say casters and healers will benefit the most from using light armor. Now before we move on, there are 2 trends that you need to be aware of. Number 1 is that many armor passives get better the more armor pieces you wear from that skill. For example, in light armor, we saw we would get increased magic recovery and increased magicka cost reduction the more pieces of light armor that we were wearing. Number 2 is that some passives actually require a minimum of armor pieces to be worn for that passive to work. In light armor, we see both prodigy and concentration that have a minimum of 5 pieces of light armor required to use. So basically you need 5, 6, or even 7 pieces of light armor equipped to benefit from those 2 passives, otherwise they will not work at all. Next up is the medium armor skill line, which again is going to be preferred for any class using the melee style weapons like dual wield, two-hand, even bow, or any class skills that are stamina based. And let's see why that is. So first we have the dexterity passive. This gives us 328 weapon critical per piece of medium armor equipped. Then we have the Windwalker passive, which is basically the stamina version of the evocation passive, which we saw earlier. This gives us increased stamina recovery and stamina cost reduction. We then have the athletics passive. This increases our speed while sprinting by 3% per piece and reduces the cost of your roll dodge by 4% per piece. You also have the Agility passive, an extremely strong passive for medium armor builds. This buffs our total weapon damage by 15%, as long as we're wearing 5 pieces of medium armor or more. And finally, you do have some utility here with the improved Sneak passive, which reduces the cost of sneaking by 7% and reduces the size of your detection radius by 5% per piece, making the medium armor skill line your go-to for any sneak focus build in ESO. And last but not least, we have the heavy armor skill line, which, as we mentioned before, is going to be ideal for damage mitigation, survival, and tank builds. In the heavy armor passives, we have the Resolve passive, which increases our physical and spell resistance by 362 per piece. We have the Constitution passive, which increases health recovery by 4% per piece, as well as restores stamina and magicka when you take damage. That goes up the more pieces of heavy armor you have as well. The Juggernaut passive raises your max health by 2% per piece of heavy armor. Revitalize requires you wear at least 5 pieces of heavy armor, and it improves the amount of resources your heavy attacks restore. Rapid Mending also requires 5 pieces of heavy armor and increases your healing received by 8%. So as we can see, the heavy armor skill line is going to be ideal for mitigating damage, improving your build's health, health recovery, healing received, sustain in battle, and so on, which makes this ideal for tanky style builds in ESO. Of course, another very important aspect of the armor skill lines is going to be those active abilities. These are Annulment for light armor, Evasion for medium armor, and Unstoppable for heavy armor. Now, unlike the passives we saw earlier, these skills actually can be slotted on your skill bar, and you actively cast these to improve your defense. The first thing we need to know about these is that to use these abilities, you must be wearing at least 5 pieces of whatever the armor type is. So if you want to cast Evasion from the medium armor skill line, you would need to be wearing at least 5 pieces of medium armor. The same is true of Annulment. You need to be wearing 5 pieces of light, and Unstoppable, where you must be wearing 5 pieces of heavy or more. Another quick tip here as well is if your armor becomes broken, the game will actually not let you cast that armor ability anymore. Basically, the game thinks you're not wearing the required 5 pieces anymore, and you lose the ability to cast that skill. So remember to repair that armor as often as possible, or you might be stuck without that defensive ability right in the middle of combat. Now onto what these skills actually do. First, let's talk about Annulment from the light armor skill line. As we said before, light armor has the lowest amount of raw defense in the game. This means that when enemies hit you, they will hit you for more damage than if you were wearing medium armor or heavy armor. But Annulment from the light armor skill line can actually counteract this because it is a magical damage shield. As you can see, when I cast this ability, my character now has a barrier around them. Also, my health bar here, if you notice at the bottom, has a similar barrier effect on it. This means the damage shield is active. Basically, what a damage shield does is it makes an enemy break through the damage shield before they can actually start damaging your health bar. In other words, the value of this damage shield essentially becomes extra health for my character. Once that damage shield either breaks from taking too much damage or it expires because the timer on the buff ran out, enemies will then have immediate access to my true health value under the shield, and then they're going to start damaging me for real. Now, there are also 2 morph options here for this skill as well. The first morph increases the size of the damage shield, while the second morph restores magicka to your character when you get hit. In the medium armor skill line, you have the Evasion skill. Evasion provides a fairly unique buff to your character called Major Evasion, and this makes your character take 25% less damage from area of effect skills. Now, this is nice to run for medium armor builds since your base armor ratings are still fairly low compared to heavy armor, so that extra defense from area attacks is especially nice, both in PvE and PvP situations. And with the 2 morph options here, you can choose from either snare and root removal or increased movement speed when you take damage. Finally, we have the Unstoppable skill from the heavy armor skill line. This skill gives us Major Resolve. That's a buff that increases both our physical and spell resistance by 50 to 80. Also, depending on the morph you choose here, you can also get increased damage mitigation when you're blocking, or cost reduction when you break free. So if you're interested in these skill lines, just remember you need to be wearing 5 pieces of the right armor type in order to use them. You do not have to use them, but they are some very nice defensive buffs that you can make use of depending on your build. Now moving on to my final armor tip, remember that you can also mix and match armor types to fully maximize your build, so think about those passives and what's going to help you the most. For example, a tank build, you could wear 7 heavy pieces for the most health and defense, or you could also wear 5 pieces of heavy and 2 pieces of light. This way you can still get the best heavy armor passives, which you need, remember, 5 pieces to use those. But you could also get some bonus magicka recovery and magicka cost reduction by running those 2 pieces of light, which can be very helpful when tanking. So keep that in mind, you're not forced to wear just one type. Also be aware that there's another passive in this game which is actually really powerful, and it has to do with armor types. It's from the Undaunted skill line, which is one of the guild skill lines that you can get in the game. And it's called Undaunted Metal. This increases your max health, your max stamina, and max magicka by 2% per type of armor, so heavy, medium, or light. Meaning if you wear, let's say, 5 of one type and 1 of the other 2 types respectively, you can unlock up to 6% bonus raw stats for your build in all your resource pools, which can be a very powerful buff for your character. This is where you'll often hear players talking about a 5-1-1 armor setup, which basically just means they're using something like 5 light pieces, 1 medium piece, and 1 heavy piece to maximize that Undaunted passive. And with all that said, that's going to wrap up this guide for choosing the right armor type in ESO. I hope that this video has been helpful for you. And I also have many more beginner's guides on my channel and even full build videos for every class in the game, so I definitely recommend you check those out. If you're new to ESO or you just want to learn more about the game, then definitely subscribe to the channel. There's new content here every week. And as always, if you enjoyed the video today, don't forget to crush that like button as well. Once again, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you around in the next video.